Marcus Kendall never expected a Tuesday night to rewrite his entire life. The day had started with the same comfortable rhythm it always had, a morning jog through the leaf-lined streets, a long day at the office, and dinner alone in the kitchen while jazz played softly from the radio. Outside, the autumn air carried the faint scent of wood smoke from chimneys, a familiar, cozy smell. But by nightfall, that scent would become something far darker. It started with a sharp crack in the distance, like a tree branch snapping. Marcus barely noticed it until a faint orange glow flickered against his living room wall. He set down his coffee, frowning, and stepped to the front window. For a heartbeat, his mind refused to register what his eyes saw. Fire licking up the side of his garage, sparks leaping into the wind like tiny, furious stars. He ran to the door, yanking it open as the heat hit him in a suffocating wave. "Call 911!" he shouted to no one in particular, already sprinting toward the garden hose coiled at the side of the house. But the flames were moving too fast, roaring louder as they found something to feed on inside. From the corner of his eye, he caught a silhouette across the road. A woman stood under the dim glow of a street lamp, arms folded, face tilted just enough for the light to reveal the curve of a smirk. Even from that distance, Marcus knew the posture, the perfectly straightened bob of blonde hair, Karen Albright, president of the homeowners board. She didn't move toward the fire. She didn't shout for help. She simply watched. Marcus turned back to the hose, wrenching the nozzle open, spraying wildly toward the flames, but it was like trying to put out a bonfire with a water pistol. The fire hissed in mockery, climbing, higher, until the roof of the garage groaned under the heat. Somewhere inside, the tires of his old convertible exploded with a muffled boom, sending a fresh rush of black smoke into the night. By the time the fire truck's sirens howled down the street, Marcus's arms were shaking with exhaustion. 2 firefighters took over instantly, barking orders, their faces glowing in the reflection of the blaze. He stumbled back toward the driveway, coughing into his sleeve, heart hammering. Karen was still there. She had taken a few steps closer. Now, her head tilted in what might have been curiosity or something colder. Marcus locked eyes with her for one long, strange moment. She didn't look surprised. She looked satisfied. Then she turned and walked away, heels clicking against the pavement like punctuation marks. The firefighters battled the flames for what felt like an hour, finally dousing the last stubborn embers. Steam hissed off the charred frame of the garage. The once white siding of the house was now streaked black. The windows cracked from the heat. The smell of burned wood and melted plastic hung heavy in the air. A fire inspector arrived, moving with brisk efficiency, jotting notes, occasionally glancing at Marcus. "We'll have to look into the source," he said, voice muffled behind his mask. "Could be electrical, could be something else." His tone lingered on those last 2 words just long enough to make Marcus's skin prickle. When the trucks finally pulled away, Marcus was left standing in the middle of his driveway, alone under the faint glow of the streetlight. He could still see in his mind the exact shape of Karen's smirk. It wasn't just a look, it was a message. That night, in the stale air of his hotel room, Marcus replayed every detail. The crack of wood, the unnatural speed of the flames, Karen's folded arms, the way she hadn't lifted a finger, and for the first time, a thought began to form in the back of his mind. Sharp, cold, and unshakable. This wasn't an accident. Marcus woke the next morning in the stiff bed of his hotel room with the taste of smoke still clinging to his throat. For a brief, disoriented moment, he thought the fire might have been a bad dream, until he looked at the heap of clothes in the corner, each piece still faintly smelling of char and ash. He had barely finished his first coffee when a knock rattled the door. Not the urgent pounding of firefighters or police, but a measured, polite knock. He opened the door to find a young man in a collared shirt holding a white envelope. "Delivery for you," the man said, handing it over. There was no return address, only Marcus's name typed neatly on the front. Inside, on crisp paper with an official-looking letterhead, was a short message. "Following last night's unfortunate incident, a review of your property reveals hazardous and non-compliant electrical wiring, as well as unsafe storage practices. We regret to inform you that these conditions created a fire hazard. Please address these issues immediately to avoid further consequences. No expression of concern, no offer of help, no acknowledgement of the loss." It was signed with the unmistakable looping script of Karen Albright. Marcus read it twice, his jaw tightening with each line. The sheer speed of it, arriving less than 12 hours after the fire, told him this wasn't an off-the-cuff note. This had been prepared. He set the letter on the table, the paper already creasing beneath his clenched fingers. The phrasing was cold, almost smug. She hadn't called him. She hadn't asked if he was okay. Instead, she had found a way to shift the blame. The phone on the nightstand rang, jolting him from his thoughts. It was James, his next-door neighbor. "Marcus, I don't know if I should even be saying this," James began, his voice low. "But you should know Karen was in your driveway last night. I saw her. She was carrying something like a canister." Marcus's grip on the phone tightened. "When?" "Not long before the fire started. And I'm not the only one. You might want to talk to Mrs. Rivera down the block." She had her phone out. "I think she was recording." Marcus leaned back in the chair, staring at the folded letter on the table. So he wasn't imagining it. He had seen her. Others had seen her. And now she had sent him a letter framing him for the disaster. After hanging up, he paced the small room. Years of practicing law had taught him one thing. People make mistakes when they think they've already won. Karen's letter might have been her first one. Marcus pulled his laptop from his bag and began making a list. First, he would need to speak to the neighbors. Second, he needed any photos or videos before they disappeared. And third, though the thought made him almost smile, he needed to prepare himself for the possibility that Karen had just handed him the keys to a case that could not only clear his name, but turn the tables entirely. By mid-afternoon, Marcus drove back to his street. The smell of charred wood still hung over the blackened remains of his garage. Caution tape fluttered in the wind, casting long shadows across the driveway. A small group of neighbors stood at the end of the block, pretending not to stare. Marcus offered a nod, walking past them toward his mailbox, or what was left of it. A small plastic crate had been placed there as a temporary solution, and inside, among the junk flyers and circulars, was a second copy of the letter. This one was in a sealed envelope marked urgent. It wasn't urgent to Marcus, not anymore. He had already decided on his next move. By the following morning, Marcus had shifted into a different gear. The shock of losing his home still simmered in the background, but it was no longer in control. Now his mind was running on the familiar rails of preparation, strategy, and evidence. He started with Mrs. Rivera, a widow in her 70s who had lived on the street longer than anyone else. She answered her door in a cardigan, the faint smell of cinnamon drifting from the kitchen. "Marcus," she said softly, "I was going to call you today." He stepped inside, glancing toward the kitchen table where a phone sat face down. "James said you might have seen something," Marcus said. Mrs. Rivera hesitated, then turned her phone over and opened the photo gallery. She scrolled past pictures of grandkids and garden roses until she stopped at a video thumbnail taken the night of the fire. The clip was shaky but clear enough. Karen, walking up Marcus's driveway, holding a red plastic gas can. The timestamp was 9:42 p.m., less than 10 minutes before Marcus saw the flames. "I didn't think it was my place to say anything," Mrs. Rivera whispered. But when James mentioned it, well, I thought you should know. Marcus transferred the file to his own phone and thanked her. That was his first piece of hard evidence, but far from the last. Next, he stopped at the small cafe near the corner where Rachel, a college student who sometimes worked as a dog walker, was taking orders. When she spotted Marcus, her eyes widened. Hey, are you okay? About the fire? I'm managing, Marcus said, but I need to ask you something. Did you see anyone near my place that night? Rachel glanced around before lowering her voice. I saw Karen. I was coming back from a walk with Mr. Lee's bulldog. She was standing by your garage. She looked nervous, I guess. She kept looking over her shoulder. Marcus wrote her statement in a small leather notebook, word for word. Witnesses were valuable, but only if their accounts matched. So far, everything aligned. The gas can, the driveway, the time frame. His last stop of the day was James's house. They sat at his kitchen counter, 2 beers sweating on the wood surface. James was the most reluctant of the three, but once he started talking, the words tumbled out. I didn't want to get involved, James admitted, but it's bothering me. She wasn't just there. She was muttering to herself. Something. Like, this will send a message. Then she walked away quickly, like she didn't want anyone to notice her. Marcus closed his notebook, satisfied. 3 separate witnesses, a video, and the letter Karen had sent less than a day after the fire, already assigning blame to him. The puzzle pieces were sliding into place, but Marcus also knew he couldn't rush. The best cases weren't built in days. They were assembled with patience, precision, and an eye for the smallest details. He needed more than suspicion and scattered accounts. He needed a chain of evidence so tight that even the most expensive defense lawyer couldn't cut through it. That night in his hotel room, Marcus organized the files on his laptop. Video clips, written statements, scanned copies of Karen's letter. He labeled each one carefully. When he was done, he leaned back in the chair, staring at the glow of the screen. He could almost hear Karen's voice from past board meetings, brisk and condescending, talking over anyone who disagreed with her. That tone had ruled the street for years, but this time, Marcus thought, she wouldn't be the one holding the gavel. Outside, the city hummed with the low noise of traffic and distant sirens. Inside, Marcus was already several moves ahead, and Karen had no idea the net was quietly closing around her. Marcus had spent most of his adult life watching people make the same mistake, underestimating him. It had worked in his favor more times than he could count in court. Opposing counsel would glance at his calm demeanor, the unassuming way he dressed, and assume he was just another mid-tier lawyer trying to look busy. They didn't realize until too late that Marcus specialized in cases exactly like this. Property damage, negligence, and intent so well hidden it took a practiced hand to uncover. Now, sitting at the small desk in his hotel room, Marcus felt the familiar shift from victim to strategist. The fear and confusion of the fire were fading, replaced by the steady hum of calculation. He pulled a thick case file from his briefcase, flipping past the usual intake forms until he reached a blank legal pad. At the top, he wrote, Albright, case prep. The first page was a simple list, witness statements, Rivera, James, Rachel video evidence, driveway footage, Rivera, written evidence, board letter, delivered 24 HRs after incident, timeline of events. To be cross-checked, he paused, tapping the pen against the pad. This was already stronger than some cases that had gone to trial. But Karen wouldn't just fold. She was the type who would deny, deflect, and then attack, which meant he needed every angle covered. Marcus's phone buzzed. It was an email from an old friend, Laura, a fire investigator he'd worked with on 2 separate cases. He had sent her preliminary photos from the fire scene that morning just to see if anything jumped out at her. Her reply was short but telling. From what I can see, this doesn't look accidental. Possible accelerant patterns near garage entry. Get samples tested if possible. Marcus allowed himself a thin smile. Laura's trained eye was rarely wrong. That note would be gold later. He leaned back in his chair, letting the bigger picture form. If Karen had started that fire, and the evidence was stacking toward that conclusion, she had also crossed into a realm where Marcus felt most at home, civil litigation with teeth. Not only could he prove her actions caused the damage, but he could make her answer for them in a courtroom she would never expect to find herself in. The thought of it was almost cinematic. He pictured her sitting across from him at the counsel table, realizing for the first time that the man she thought she could intimidate was the same one who would be questioning her under oath. But he also knew this couldn't just be about payback. It had to be airtight, professional, and undeniable. One misstep, one hint of personal vendetta, and she'd use it to paint him as the aggressor. So he went to work the only way he knew how, methodically. He scheduled follow-up interviews with each witness, making sure their statements were consistent. He arranged for a certified copy of the video file to be time-stamped and stored securely. And he drafted an initial complaint, not to file yet, but to refine until it was razor-sharp. By the time midnight came, Marcus's desk was a controlled chaos of papers, sticky notes, and printed screenshots. He closed the file and locked it in his briefcase, then sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the faint city lights through the window. Karen still thought she was holding the upper hand. She still thought that letter she sent had set the tone. She had no idea the game had already changed, and that Marcus Kendall was playing on home turf now. Tomorrow the next move would be his. The homeowners board met once a month in the converted library room of the old community center, a space that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and coffee no one ever actually drank. Marcus hadn't been inside for months, but tonight he arrived, early. He took a seat in the far back just outside the main circle of folding tables where the board members sat. From there, he could watch without being in the spotlight. He didn't need attention tonight. He just needed Karen. She came in 5 minutes late, her usual entrance, heels clicking sharply against the tile, a stack of folders under her arm, and that faint air of being too busy for the rest of the world. She scanned the room with brisk disinterest, only briefly pausing when her eyes passed over Marcus. If she felt anything seeing him there, she didn't show it. The meeting began as always. Approval of last month's minutes, a few housekeeping updates, a long-winded discussion about landscaping contracts. Marcus listened, but his attention was on the door. At precisely 7:28 p.m., it opened again. A man in a gray suit stepped inside, scanning the tables until his gaze landed on Karen. Without hesitation, he walked straight to her. "Karen Albright?" he asked, his voice carrying just enough for the first 2 rows of chairs to hear. She looked up, mildly annoyed. "Yes. Why?" The man reached into his briefcase, pulled out a thick envelope, and set it in front of her. "You've been served," he said, turning to leave as efficiently as he'd entered. For a second, Karen didn't move. The room had gone strangely quiet, as if even the old air conditioning unit had decided to stop humming to hear what would happen next. She picked up the envelope, her eyes scanning the bold header at the top of the first page. The color drained from her face so quickly Marcus almost thought she might be sick. She glanced toward the back of the room, toward him. Marcus met her gaze and gave the faintest nod, the kind you'd give an opponent across a chessboard when you'd just taken their queen. The board's vice president, a man named Carl who had always seemed faintly uncomfortable with Karen's leadership style, cleared his throat. Should we continue the meeting?" Karen snapped the folder shut and slid it into her bag. "Yes, of course," she said, her voice a notch too high. But the rhythm of the meeting was gone. Every word after that landed flat, weighed, down by the unspoken curiosity of the other members. Marcus stayed until the end, letting Karen feel the weight of his presence without saying a word. When the meeting adjourned, she packed up quickly and headed for the exit. He stepped into the hallway just as she did, timing it perfectly so their paths would cross. "Karen," he said, his tone polite but firm. She paused, forcing a tight smile. "Marcus, I see you're taking this seriously." "I always take my property seriously," he said. "And the law." Her eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. With a curt nod, she walked past him, her heels clicking a little faster this time. Marcus watched her go, the echo of her steps fading down the hall. The envelope in her bag wasn't just paperwork. It was the beginning of a process she couldn't control. He had set the board, placed the pieces, and now the first real move had been made. The next time they saw each other, it wouldn't be in a stuffy meeting room with folding tables. It would be in a place Marcus knew better than anyone, his courtroom. The courthouse was colder than Marcus expected. It wasn't the chill of the air conditioning, but the quiet tension that hung in the marble hallways. The kind of silence that promised things were about to change, dramatically. Marcus arrived early, dressed sharply in a tailored navy suit. It had been years since he'd stepped inside this building as anything other than a lawyer, and today was no different. Except this time, he wasn't just a bystander or a defender. He was the one bringing the fight. The room filled slowly. People trickled in, a few residents from the street, Karen's attorney, and then finally Karen herself. She entered with the same confident stride she had in every neighborhood meeting, but this time her face betrayed a flicker of doubt. When the judge called the case to order, the room hushed completely. Marcus watched Karen across the table. For the first time, she wasn't the one with power. She was the one on the defensive. The judge looked at the papers in front of him and then addressed the room. "This case involves the fire damage sustained at 457 Elmwood Drive, brought by Mr. Marcus Kendall against Ms. Karen Albright." Karen blinked. "Against me?" she repeated, her voice sharper than she intended. The judge nodded. "Yes, Ms. Albright. Mr. Kendall is represented by counsel." He then turned toward Marcus. "Mr. Kendall, you may proceed." It was the moment. Karen realized Marcus wasn't just the victim. He was the attorney who would be questioning her under oath. Her confidence faltered. For years, she had relied on the weight of her position, her ability to sway opinions during board meetings, to keep the peace on the street. But here, in the courtroom's stark fluorescent light, those tools were useless. Marcus rose, voice calm but deliberate. "Ms. Albright, can you explain why you were seen on Mr. Kendall's property the night the fire began, carrying a gas can?" Karen's eyes darted briefly to her attorney, who mouthed a warning, but she answered anyway. "I was checking for a gas leak after a reported smell in the neighborhood. I wanted to make sure no one was in danger." Marcus pulled out the video from Mrs. Rivera's phone and played it for the court. The shaky footage showed Karen walking slowly up the driveway, carrying the canister clearly labeled as gasoline. "Do you expect this court to believe you carried gasoline onto Mr. Kendall's property as a safety precaution?" Marcus asked, voice steady. Karen hesitated, then shook her head. I don't know what to say." The judge leaned forward, eyes sharp. "Ms. Albright, do you deny having anything to do with the fire?" She swallowed hard. "I do." Marcus then introduced the letter Karen had sent, the one blaming Marcus for the fire due to hazardous wiring and unsafe storage. The court murmured quietly as it was read aloud. "Why send such a letter so quickly, Ms. Albright?" Marcus asked. Karen's face tightened. "I wanted to protect the neighborhood." "But you were also president of the homeowners board?" "Yes. Is it your role to protect the neighborhood, or to take responsibility when your actions cause harm?" Marcus's voice didn't waver. Karen had no answer. The courtroom was silent, save for the shuffling of papers and the judge's steady breathing. As the questioning continued, witness statements and evidence unfolded like chapters of a book no one wanted to read. It painted a clear picture. Karen's presence, the gas can, the timing, and her letter all lined up to suggest one thing. Marcus watched her closely. The powerful figure she had been on the street was dissolving before his eyes, replaced by someone trying to defend a story that didn't hold water. When the session adjourned, Karen left without a word. Marcus stayed behind a moment longer, packing up his files. Outside the courtroom, a few neighbors approached him quietly, gratitude and disbelief mixed in their voices. For Marcus, this was only the beginning. The courtroom was where truth could no longer be ignored, and where he had finally taken control. The days that followed the courtroom hearing were filled with a tense hush over the neighborhood. Marcus could feel it whenever he stepped outside, the quiet glances, the half-whispered conversations as neighbors passed by, the way the street seemed to hold its breath. Karen, meanwhile, became a shadow of her usual self. The confident, commanding presence that had dominated every meeting was replaced by nervous glances and guarded smiles. Marcus's phone buzzed one morning with a text from Rachel, the college student who had witnessed Karen's suspicious behavior that night. "There's more. I overheard Karen talking on the phone last night. She sounded panicked." Marcus didn't waste a moment. He arranged to meet Rachel at the cafe later that afternoon. Over coffee, Rachel shared what she'd overheard. Karen had been speaking, in hurried tones, about cleaning up the mess and making sure no one found out. Marcus scribbled notes, a knot tightening in his stomach. This wasn't just a case of negligence, it was a cover-up. At the same time, Marcus's fire investigator friend Laura sent back the results from the accelerant tests. The lab confirmed the presence of gasoline residues near the garage entry, matching the canister seen in the video. It was a smoking gun, quite literally. Armed with new evidence, Marcus prepared for the next court date. His strategy was clear: dismantle Karen's defenses piece by piece, revealing the full extent of what had happened. In court, the mood was different. Karen's attorney tried to push back, questioning witnesses and disputing timelines, but the mounting proof was overwhelming. Witness after witness recounted Karen's actions: the late-night visit, the gas can, the suspicious phone call. The video was played again, the shaky footage more damning with each viewing. Under Marcus's steady questioning, Karen's carefully crafted story began to unravel. Her denials sounded weaker, her explanations less convincing. Outside the courtroom, the media had started to take notice. Local news outlets called it a stunning HOA scandal, and neighbors who had remained silent before now stepped forward with their own stories of questionable behavior. Marcus watched it all with a quiet satisfaction. This was more than a legal battle. It was a reckoning. One afternoon, as he reviewed documents in his hotel room, his phone rang. It was Karen. "I want to talk," she said, voice strained. Marcus didn't hesitate. "I'm listening." Their conversation was tense but civil. Karen admitted she was overwhelmed but refused to admit guilt. Still, the cracks in her armor were unmistakable. By the end of the call, Marcus knew one thing for certain. Karen was no longer the unshakable force she once seemed. The next court date would be crucial. The evidence was on his side. But so was the momentum, and Marcus intended to see it through, all the way to the final verdict. The courtroom was packed. Word had spread through the neighborhood and beyond. This wasn't just any trial, but the moment everything came to a head. Marcus sat calmly at the plaintiff's table, files neatly organized, while Karen appeared tense, her usual composure noticeably cracked. The judge called the session to order, eyes scanning the room before, turning to Marcus. "Mr. Kendall, you may proceed with your closing argument." Marcus stood and looked across at Karen, then addressed the court with steady conviction. "Your Honor, this case is about accountability. It's about the trust we place in those who lead and protect our communities. Karen Albright was given a position of responsibility, a role to serve her neighbors with integrity and care. But what we uncovered was something very different. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Through witness testimony, video evidence, and scientific analysis, it's clear that Ms. Albright was present at the scene of the fire with gasoline in hand, shortly before it erupted. She then attempted to deflect blame, sending letters and making claims that cast suspicion elsewhere, all while the damage was mounting. Marcus held up the envelope containing Karen's letter, letting the courtroom see it. This was no accident, and it was no simple misunderstanding. It was a deliberate act with real consequences, a home lost, safety endangered, and a community shaken. Karen's attorney rose quickly, but the judge raised a hand to pause him. Miss Albright, you will have an opportunity to respond after Mr. Kendall finishes. Marcus took his seat, watching as Karen stood. She took a deep breath, her voice quieter than before. Your Honor, I deeply regret the events that have brought us here, but I maintain that I did not cause this fire intentionally. I was acting out of concern, misguided as it may have been. Her eyes flicked nervously to Marcus before she sat down. The judge nodded thoughtfully. After reviewing all the evidence presented and hearing the testimony of witnesses, this court finds in favor of Mr. Marcus Kendall. A collective breath seemed to release from the room. Ms. Albright, you are held responsible for the damages caused by the fire. Compensation will be awarded to Mr. Kendall for the loss of his home and related expenses. Further, this ruling serves as a reminder that those entrusted with leadership must uphold the highest standards. Karen's face remained expressionless, but Marcus could see the weight of the verdict sinking in. As the gavel struck, Marcus felt a surge of relief, not just for himself, but for everyone who had quietly suffered under Karen's reign. Outside the courthouse, neighbors approached him, offering thanks and words of support. The community felt different now, lighter somehow, as if the shadow that had hung over their street was finally lifting. Marcus knew the road ahead would still have challenges. Rebuilding a home, healing trust, moving forward. But this victory was a crucial first step, and for the first time since the fire, he felt the certainty that justice had truly been served.